This presentation gives you an example of a literature review protocol. This example is presented on literature review protocol template in our course pages. This specific example is focusing on social effects of hackathons. The rationale for this study is the need to find the various social effects of hackathons and how those are achieved, meaning what methods have been used. As such, we define our main research question as what kind of social effects of hackathons have been reported in the literature. It is good to have a short rationale for each research question of why you want to study that question. That helps later on the arguments for your study. You may add some sub-research questions to pinpoint the details of the study. You may also add the rationales for the sub-research questions. From the research questions, we get few keywords we want to use in our searches. In this case, hackathon, hack, effect, impact, social, and society. And from these keywords, we can generate a general search query that we can use. So in this case, the general search query would be hackathon or hack and social or society and impact or effect. The next phase is to decide which one of the databases to use. For this example, we have selected 4 databases as proposed by Kitchenham in her literature review guidelines. You should note that some databases have benefits in data gathering, as will be shown later. LUT Library provides the access to our students to most of the database you might need. You get to the databases through LUT Finna, and by selecting the Databases tab. Each database entry provides you a link to the database interface. Note that you might need to log in with your LUT credentials to get the access. Let us look at the Web of Science and IEEE interfaces as an example. I have opened these database interfaces here, and we have a search, the general query that we did, and searching for Web of Science. We can see that we find altogether 19 results with this particular query. In IEEE Explore, with the same query, hackathon and hack, and so on, we can get altogether 123 results. Due to the high number of these articles, we do not have to, if we don't want, to consider journals or conferences in our searches. Neither we don't need to use the snowballing because we have quite an extensive number of articles. If you would be looking at the ACM and Springer, you would notice that there are thousands of articles, which means that we would probably need to add some search terms or limit the time scale. The good point of Web of Science is that you may download the results in CSV form by using the export function. Depending on the tool you might want to use, you need to select a proper set of data to be downloaded. If you have less than 500 records in your dataset, you can download all of those at the same time. It's good to download the full record and cited references, although you don't necessarily need all the data. But some of the tools use, for example, the cited references to build up some citation maps. You also need to select the format in which you want to download or export the records. Now that I export these things, I will get a CSV file that looks pretty cryptic. Web of Science gives you several different fields of data, so that for each and every entry, and there was 19 entries in that data set, there is answer to all those, or most of those columns. Reading the CSV file by using TextEdit or similar is not so good, so it's better to import the data into Excel file. Basically, by doing importing, you select the CSV file, and the file that you got, you need to look if it's fixed or delimited. This depends on the database that you are using. In this case, it's a tab delimited dataset. And when we then import this thing, we can see the same set of data now nicely set into columns. You can see that the authors are in column B, the title is in column I, and if I remember correctly, column B is the abstract. Now that you have the data in Excel form, and you basically do the same thing for different databases. You collect the data from different databases, and you want to connect or collect these things together. So what you definitely need to do is add here a couple of columns for selection purposes. First of all, you need identity for each one of the papers. Let's put that this is ID. Then we have the database. So this is Web of Science. And then we might have from here on IEEE database documents. And one more thing that you definitely need is this include column that you need to mark if when reading the titles and the abstracts you make a decision, or the working group or the research team makes a decision if you are including these papers into the actual dataset. Now that you do this for each and every one of those databases, you collect the data here. You don't need to have all the data over here in this dataset. Probably the ones that you definitely need in the data extraction phase. For the general data, you need the author, title, year, abstract for content analysis, maybe the venue, database, where you got it. And those are basically the general data that you get automatically from those databases by downloading the data from databases. Just remember that the different databases might have different ways of exporting the data. It takes some time to combine all these things. The more important thing is when you start thinking of the specific data that you need to answer your research questions. For example, in my case, hackathon topic, location length, year, stakeholders, used method, and so on. Let me now clean up a bit of this this file that we have here and delete the unnecessary data quickly. Okay, abstract is there, and we should probably have the publication year. No, abstract was author's abstract. Yes, now from here on, need to find the year in which this was published. That is something what we want to keep here. Publication year is here. Yes, and then some more things we probably want to keep is the DOI, the identity for your paper, so that it's easy to find the paper as such, because if you are including it into your dataset, you also need to fetch that paper from the databases. And you could also give some keyword or keep some keywords and so on, but I'll delete everything except the author, title, abstract, publication year, DOI. And then what is important is that the data that you you need to collect to answer your research questions. Like the hackathon topic, what you can do, you can add these things here into this Excel sheet in such a way. Let me just put this hack topic. We have the hack location, etc. You basically add here all the data that you need, and then when you read those things, you can fill in the data here into this particular table. An easier way of doing this thing is to create a Google form. This is, let's create social hack effects. Form, and then we have a paper ID. Let's make that this is a number. Where is that? No. Short answer, number is a number, yes. And we can also put that this is required. And then you can even have, if you have several reviewers, review name. You can have the final decision include. And this is good to have actually a multiple choice in such a way that you have 0, 1, and one more thing that we need to have is 0.5. And the idea here is that 0 means that the evaluator who has been reading the paper thinks that this is excluded. 1 means definitely include. 0.5 is somewhere in between, and if you have 2 persons to read these things, you can make a rule that if there is at least the sum of these things is 1, meaning that both of those members have been saying 0.5 at least, then you include that. If it's less than that, then you don't include it. That helps in the selection of the actual articles. And the good point here in Google Form is that when you get the responses, there is the possibility of creating a spreadsheet of all those answers, and then you can combine, when you have the ID of the paper and so on, combine the responses with your original spreadsheet of the data that you are going through. That helps and makes it sure that you answer to all the research questions and collect all the necessary data from all the papers by having a form that you need to fill for each and every one of the papers. The last thing in literature review protocol template is the team and roles. Quite often this is done by one person and in such a way that some person does the development of the search queries, running those test queries, maybe doing some iterative evolution of the search queries, then running the final search queries, and then you can and basically collecting the general data of those studies. But when it comes to the inclusion and exclusion, deciding which ones to include and exclude, you need to diminish the researcher bias, and it's good to have at least 2 reviewers for the papers in such a way that you can assess the quality of the selected papers. The last thing in this literature review protocol is the review of the protocol itself. For just like said, for the PhD students, it can be the supervisor who goes through this protocol and sees that, okay, this is a good plan, you can go on with that thing. It can also be peers, it can be peer evaluated by other researchers in the same field, saying and if you are doing things correctly. And that way, when you have done the literature review protocol, by using this template, you have basically answered how to do the actual implementation of the literature review. So this is the plan, and partly these Excel sheets are in the implementation part, but it's good to know that you can use those different databases in such a way that you can try to make it as automatic as possible.